Welcome to A Leader's Story, where we explore the unique paths of extraordinary leaders. In each episode, we ask the same 7 questions to our guests, revealing the diverse journeys and insights that shape their success. Join us as we uncover the stories that make each leader's experience truly one of a kind. Today, we are thrilled to feature Steve Philpott, the current IT strategic advisor at Intel and interim CIO at Altera. With over 2 decades of leadership experience, Steve has driven innovative and strategic growth at major companies like Western Digital, Illumina, and Qualcomm. He also plays a pivotal role in the Society for Information Management in San Diego, contributing to the IT community's growth and development. Join us as Steve shares his story and insights on leadership. Steve, what is one decision you made that was a turning point for your leadership?
Morning. Yeah, it's great to get an opportunity to discuss leadership and kind of how it helps us move organizations forward. But one of the major decisions that I had that was a real turning point in my life was around failure. But understanding failure and understanding how to accept failure when it happens to you, but also how it taught me to lead teams through failure. Because you're never in that environment where everything goes perfect.
Right.
As we know, there's always things that pop up and the unexpected, and you try to plan for them. But that was one of the turning points I thought for me, and it was over 2 decades ago, and it was a large software deployment. And literally what ended up happening is the deployment wiped out the ability for all the employees to log into systems. I mean, so somewhat impactful. Well, we worked through the issues. We got things going very quickly, but it was really visible through the organization, as you can imagine. And I thought for sure I was going to be fired. Again, this is 2 decades ago, early in my career. But the CIO I had was a really, really strong leader, really strong mentor. I respected him, very much. And he kind of walked me through it. And he walked me through the discussion around failure, about how it happens, despite the risk management we put ahead of it. It happens, but it's how we respond to failures in the moment. And then from a leadership side, it helped teach me how to lead teams through the inevitable failures that happen in our careers over time. And I just thought that was an impactful thing where I had such an event, and that event helped drive how I lead and manage people going forward.
Interesting. That's really good. So is there any particular insights gained from, how you handle failure today because of that?
It taught me how to manage my team going through when they have failures. And, how do we coach them? How do we manage them? And the same thing that happened to me over 2 decades ago, how do we provide that leadership and mentorship to our team so that over their career, they can benefit from those same learnings?
That's great. That's awesome. So leading us into the next question, Steve, how do you foster innovation and creativity within your team?
Yeah, and this is always an interesting discussion with IT, because there's so much just operational block and tackling. I mean, whatever we call kind of that basic aspects of IT. But we're in a time right now where the pace of innovation is accelerating at a phenomenal pace. And the pace of innovation right now is such that we really need to foster how we drive our teams through it. And I think a couple things here, and I just talked about failure. So one of the things that happens when you're driving that type of innovation is you will have failures. You need to understand and allow for failures, and understand that not every innovative idea will succeed. But we need to encourage a culture where failure is seen as those learning opportunities. So how do we provide that ability to say, okay, well, that may not have worked, but how do we learn from that going forward? It also, and Joe, you'll remember this, it also drives that concept of directionally correct. When
Mm-hmm.
you're innovating and you're on that leading edge, you're not going to be perfect on those decisions, but what you want to do is be directionally correct. So if the whole industry is in the next 3 to 5 years probably going to move north, if you're moving northwest or northeast, you're directionally correct. And then the continuous improvement allows you to narrow in on where we need to be. So having that continuous improvement part of the process. The other aspect is around diversity of thought. And this is an interesting one because we all talk about DEI and diversity of teams, but you also want diversity of thought. People that have different experiences, ask different questions, and that diversity of thought really helps open up the innovation ideas. And I learned that at one of those Google workshops that they had, and this was probably over a decade or so ago. But you really need to kind of poke at some things that are a little bit different, and that diversity of thought helps us in that particular area. I think one of the other ones is just around the concept of open communications. So as you're moving through these type of innovative technology cycles, especially if you're on the leading edge of that cycle and trying to drive that, you really have to have strong communication. And that's communication internally amongst the teams that are working on that particular initiative, and then also the other stakeholders that will benefit from it. Because you can imagine from the stakeholder standpoint, if they've never seen that before, their first response is, no, okay, no, thank you. A good example is around chatbot innovation, the whole Gen I chatbot innovation that's going on right now. And you start talking to some of the stakeholders and saying, hey, directionally correct, this is where the industry is going, this is how they're doing it. And you talk about it in the concept of a chatbot, and the first thing they think about is a website. And the awful experience they had at some website and said, that's not what we're doing. But the key is the communication, so we bring those stakeholders along the journey with us.
That's really good insights. Really good. So, Steve, next question. How do you balance driving results with maintaining a positive team culture?
Yeah, how many times have we talked about the pyramid in our table group discussions? Trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. And I think when we take a look at driving those positive results and that positive team culture, it really gets down to that concept of organizational health. The concept that we have that smart org side of the equation, which is all the tactical things, the results, etc. But it's the healthy side. It's the side that is what some people call the political side, the softer side of running an organization. And they tend to be bigger drivers of results. And some of those are just setting clear expectations. We can talk about accountability. How do you address accountability and making sure that you've got kind of that prompt feedback loop? We talked about communication a minute ago, and as part of that, kind of organizational health aspect, it's really how do we communicate openly and transparently and repetitively, that concept that we need to repeat over and over again. How do we communicate in such a way to help drive that, ability for the team to see kind of where we want to go and allow them to act as a team. And communication, I think, is one of the things that is really difficult for many leaders because it requires an aspect of self-awareness, and it requires an aspect of the ability to read rooms a little bit, which gets into those softer skills. So think of the emotional intelligence, not the IQ, how smart somebody is, but from a leadership standpoint, the EQ, the emotional intelligence side, which I can comment on in a couple minutes. But that's really a big part of driving these positive team cultures is kind of the self-awareness of how do people kind of fit into the organization going forward. And it's really, really important to have that trust amongst the team so that, Joe, for you and I, we've got that trust that we can give each other feedback and say, hey, what you didn't come across well. So I think those are some of those key components of it.
That's great. So, taking a little bit of a different turn, Steve, can you describe a moment when you had to make a tough ethical decision?
Yeah, um, as a leader, you will be put into these type of situations throughout your career. Now, I'm not going to go into any specifics for confidentiality reasons, but just like we evaluate other decisions, here's another area where you kind of need to think through the process to get to the decision on what you're going to do. So think of things like gathering information and who are the stakeholders. But I think one of the things I've relied on over the years is consulting an expert or a colleague. And in your career and your leadership journey, you need to build up a couple, three, four confidants, mentors, whatever you want to call them. But they're people that you can have really, really candid conversations with and understand that they will keep it confidential. And I've done that over the years. I've had situations that proposed some type of ethical dilemma, and I was able to reach out to these individuals and say, hey, here's a situation, and then I'll give them my thought process. I'll say, hey, I've gathered the information, here's the options I've evaluated, this is what I think, and then ask them, what do you think? Get that little bit of an external sounding board, and then after that, the importance is executing quickly. If you've gotten to that point, then you need to kind of make that decision. And in some cases, that's a hard decision to somebody that's in a very senior, powerful position. But if you have gone through the process, then it allows you to have that confidence to say, yes, this is the right thing to do, and I need to kind of hold my ground. But it's a really tough part of the leadership journey.
Yeah, those are super good insights. So you mentioned feedback earlier, so this will dive into it a little bit more. Steve, what role does feedback play in your leadership? How do you both give and receive it?
Yeah, now this takes us back to our organizational health discussion and the smart org and the healthy org. And a big part of the healthy org is around giving and receiving feedback. And I really like the way you pose that question because it is two parts. It's not just giving feedback. You also, through your career, need to understand how to receive feedback. And I think there's some commonalities there, but as far as feedback, it's really understanding the timeliness, making sure it's specific. You want to give feedback that's specific enough that it becomes actionable. So
Mm,
just to give broad generic feedback sometimes isn't productive because it doesn't give that actionability for them to learn and grow on moving forward. And then also encouragement. So we started this whole discussion at the beginning around failures and the fact that during the journey, you're going to have aspects of disappointment. But as part of the feedback, that there's a dialogue of encouragement there that says, hey, this happens. This is how we correct it. This is how we go forward from here. Now, on the receiving feedback side, very, very, very similar. But on this side, what we need to do is make sure we're open. And open is partly the active listening, part of it. It's really, really listening to the person that's given the feedback, vice trying to interpret what you want to say next. And I think people get into that loop is what they're doing is they're thinking about how to respond to the feedback. I didn't do it, or this is, what happened. But really, really kind of actively listening to that. I think the other part here is about seeking feedback, and it's positively kind of going forward and seeking feedback, because in some situations, everybody gets busy, they're working on things, but taking time to actively seek feedback. How am I doing? We had certain meetings, and how did it go? What could we have done better, than the next time? And then the last part is around the follow-up and actions. So when you're receiving feedback, if there's some follow-up, is just making sure to follow up and say, hey, out of our discussion, we identified 3 things that I could work on, over the last 30 days. Here's some of the things I've been doing to help move me in the right direction. But again, that receiving feedback goes back to the emotional intelligence. The ability to have those softer skills around self-awareness that says, hey, I can always be better. I can always learn. And being open to those type of opportunities.
That's really good. So leading to the next question, Steve, how do you continue to grow and develop as a leader?
So we go back to feedback again. I mean, you've got these questions set up in such a nice way that they just kind of flow. So obviously, seeking feedback. The second part of that is the only way you get better is listening to other people. It's one of the ways. Networking and mentoring. And we talked about this when we were talking about the ethical, discussion. And it's important through your career, especially as you get up into some of the more senior roles, to have that network. And it's a network of trusted advisors. It might be people that are in the industry. It might be people that have nothing to do with the industry. But it's people where you have enough trust in them that you can have candid discussions. And it's really important because sometimes you can't ask your manager something. For some reason you may feel uncomfortable, but having this network of mentors out there allows you to have a sounding board. Here's what I'm thinking, whether it's the ethical question we talked about a minute ago, or gosh, I have this career opportunity. Do I take it or do I stay where I'm at? That panel, that advisory network mentoring opportunities, I think are just a key part of our growing opportunity. Now, there's a couple other things I think we need to think about from a growth standpoint. One is around adapting to change, and this again is part of the EQ, that emotional intelligence aspect. People tend to be creatures of habit. They tend to like to do things that are similar. Now, IT basically breaks that mold and says you're never going to do things the same, and every year or two we're going to change the foundation underneath it.
Yep.
But for a lot of areas, adapting to change. So embracing change as an opportunity for growth. And that might be reaching out to a new opportunity and you go, gosh, I've never done something in that particular area. Well, that's an opportunity for growth. So adapting to change, and then the building the emotional intelligence aspect is really understanding, okay, my IQ and my technical expertise got me to where I am. Now as I go through the next stage of my career, I need to kind of start focusing on some of those softer skills.
That's really good. Great insights, all actionable to it. So this is funny because I always think the ethical question is the hard one, but this seems to be the hardest one out of the seven. Steve, what leadership book has influenced you the most and why?
Do I get to write books in there? And
that's what it's so hard to pick one, but you can talk about as many as you want.
Yeah, and I think it's gosh, you think of all the books out there, and you can kind of look up in your closet, and there's good to great. Yeah, you think of all the big ones. There's a couple Navy specific ones. It's like ship management techniques from a Navy captain. It was how he managed the ship. Oh, Turn the Ship Around's another one. There's two or three of these type of books that come from the military leadership side that are good. But I think if I can't pick a whole bunch of books, maybe let's narrow it down to the categories that we've been talking about, and say that the books that resonate the most to me and have been the most impactful are books around the concept of organizational health and emotional intelligence. One, because they're really not taught in college. So we didn't go through our formal education, and emotional intelligence 101 was not on my college curriculum. And so you have to start looking for other ways to learn about that. We've talked about Pat Lencioni and the table group. So, the 5 dysfunctions of the team. You've got Stephen Covey out there doing similar type of things with his books around, the 7 habits of highly effective people. So you've got several practitioners out there. But there's also practitioners out there that talk about emotional intelligence. Sometimes they call it emotional intelligence, 2.0. And these are the books where they're talking about self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Because those are the concepts that are needed the further you get into the leadership category. And there's Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Travis Bradberry. There's another one, Primal Leadership, that talks about emotional intelligence, and there's several others. But I think from a recommendation standpoint, I would look at that category. Look at the category of organizational health and emotional intelligence. A lot of the other stuff will be taught or learned. Those are the things that sometimes you have to make a little bit of an extra effort to reach out and understand it.
That's really good. I think that is, like you said, it's not something that it's something you have to seek the education for. It's not something that is necessarily taught. And, just between, we're in the IT field, a lot of times, especially, I'm sure you've experienced it too, you see leadership get promoted because of their technical prowess, because of the ability, but the EQ is something that is left behind a lot of times, right? And so it's great to hear a technology leader like yourself, emphasizing that, because if you want to continue in your career and your journey and be successful, EQ is going to be extremely important.
Well, and we've seen how it plays out in our teams over the years. Over the last decade or more, we've seen the difference between organizations that have a focus around organizational health, about leadership from an EQ standpoint. We've seen areas where that's been positive, and then we've seen areas where that hasn't been embraced where, people have struggled, groups have struggled, organizations have struggled. So I think it's a great opportunity for people to access that earlier in their career.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Steve, so much for your time today. I really appreciate you participating in this experiment with me. Having Steve on today's episode was truly inspiring. I gained valuable, actionable insights, and I hope you did as well. Thank you so much for joining us on this week's edition of A Leader Story. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe to help more people discover these inspiring leadership stories. And don't forget to tune in every Tuesday for new episodes. See you next week, and keep writing your own unique leadership story.